What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. My name is Matt Hensley, the pastor of Plymouth Park Baptist Church in Irving, Texas, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Kyle Non-Alcoholic Bierman of the North American Mission Board's Replant team. My first question is of not utmost importance. Kyle, how are you doing? On a scale of, what did you just say, 18 to 7, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So the 18 to 7 is how the Rangers need to finish out the season to finish at 500, which for our non-baseball listeners, that is like 500 is like the definition of mediocre. So to finish mediocre, they have to have a fantastic end to their season.
I mean, y'all could make a run like that. I don't know what our run last year was to ultimately win the division, but
so
I just remember
interestingly enough, I saw something today that said the Rangers are, I believe, 8.5 games out of first right now, which is the exact same amount the St. Louis Cardinals were, and on this same date in 2011.
Oh.
And they went on to beat the Texas Rangers in the World Series. So you never know. But in order to do that, the Rangers are going to have to go, what's that? That's 25 games, 20-5. They got to go on a historic run here.
And isn't Seager now out for the season?
Yes, I believe so. That does not bode well.
Yeah. How's Evan Carter doing this year?
Evan is also out for the season.
Oh, how's Jacob deGrom?
He is on his way back, I hope. Lots of injuries. The Rangers, you saw them; they've been playing pretty well here of late.
Yeah,
took 2 out of 3 from the Yankees.
Well, so we do what we do best, and that is play subpar teams like they have suddenly become the greatest baseball team of all time, and got lit up yesterday by the Cincinnati Reds. I think it was 9 runs in the first inning, 7 runs in the first inning or something like that. It was one of those I'd missed the very beginning and was going to watch it up at the Iglesia. And I saw that on the MLB app, and I was like, you know what, Matt? Don't do this to yourself before a prayer meeting. Don't do it.
So maybe that'll increase your prayer life one way or the other. But other than Ellie De La Cruz, who do the Reds have?
You're asking the wrong person.
That's the only person I can name right now.
Yeah, I couldn't name anybody on the team. Today it was 1-0, and I will say nobody cares about this. You need to go back and see some of the videos. Alex Bregman quite literally got hit by a pitch, and not only did they miss the call,
I saw that.
They
missed the replay
to New York, and they missed it. I mean, there's no other. It clearly gets. I mean, there's no. Yeah. It's not one of those where it was anyway. Laughter. My favorite part though was Bregman is uncontrollably laughing as he's walking off the field. It was funny. So,
well, for all of our audience that doesn't care about baseball, the Kansas City Swifties kick off their football season tonight, in trying to defend their Super Bowl title. So that's fun. Uh-huh. I know you don't care about the NFL at all, but you do care about Taylor Swift, who I saw on social media is at the game.
She's already there.
Yep.
Shocking.
Yep. All right.
Nobody.
Well,
they're supposed to break up though the end of this month. Apparently,
I saw that. That's the the script,
that's
right?
The T. That's the T. The script. So anyway, Kyle, you know what? Baseball players and football players and basketball players, except for Allen Iverson, have in common?
They maximize their potential. I don't know. No, I don't know.
They practice.
Oh,
about practice.
Talking about practice. Not the game. Not the game. Talking about practice. All right.
Practice. And so today I want us to talk about 4 things that pastors can do, ministers can do, that specifically they can put into practice to improve their ministry. If you want to become a better golfer, you do not need to spend time with me. If you want to work on your pickleball serve, maybe spend some time with Kyle Non-Alcoholic Beerman. And for whatever reason, Kate Downing, as you started this article, you said if you're trying to improve your sourdough starter, says you got to evaluate your practices.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
today we're going to talk about some practices that we need to evaluate, make sure that we're doing well in our ministries so that we can ultimately become effective, become faithful to the ministry God has called us to do better. As Cameron Crowe has mentioned, that we have mentioned him either explicitly or implicitly in the past 2 episodes. So here is an explicit call out to, not expletive. That's what I would like to do for Cameron Crowe, but this is an explicit call out for Cameron Crowe to do better with these 4 things in mind. This is from an article on Lifeway Research that is actually for healthy practices and for unhealthy practices. We would encourage you to read both. Today we're going to focus on the healthy one. And Kyle, number 1 is this: maximize events. Now, what this is not talking about is having an event-based ministry where everything is about another event after event after event after event. But a healthy rhythm of events, there is a way to maximize that event for greater ministry effectiveness. We've talked previously of the greatest fall fest ever at Mayhill Baptist Church in Mayhill, New Mexico, where we had hundreds of kids in our tiny little town come to our church and eat their fill of candy, decked out in all of their vile, scary costumes. And we did 0 follow-up. And so it was a great event. We had a great turnout, but there was no maximization of that in terms of ministry. And so one of the things that Kate points out, or a few things to really kind of think through, is to set some dadgum goals. She does not say dadgum. I added that for comedic relief. Kyle, this event should provide blank. So give us, there's some that she mentions, some spiritual growth, methods for godly community building, clear pathway for attendees to come back into the church. Maybe, like I said, if you did a fall festival, an occasion for others to utilize their gifts by serving. We've talked previously about goals need to be identifiable, that there needs to be some way we can track them, that we meet the goal, all that kind of stuff. So give me, Kyle, in Lubbock, Texas, y'all are about to have blank event. Give me a couple of goals that y'all would strive for to maximize that event.
Yeah, so she says a clear pathway for attendees to connect back into the church. And I think that what I would change that just a little bit. I would reword that and just say there needs to be a clear plan for follow-up somehow. So again, Mark Clifton, kind of one of his famous lines, he says, you don't do events to get the members of your community into your church. You do events to get the people from your church into the lives of the people in your community. So in order to do that, it requires follow-up, right? Secondly, I would say there needs to be opportunities for your people in your church to interact with the people from the community. And she said methods for godly community building among peers, leaders, and attendees. If you're doing something in your parking lot, you need your folks there interacting, right? Whether that's serving food or kind of manning bounce houses or whatever. Give your folks the opportunity to interact with the people in your community, and then provide a clear process, a plan for follow-up somehow.
So thank you for giving me a goal that is not specific nor measurable.
well, I mean, it's going to look different in each thing, right? But okay, so what does it look like for? Do we
Lubbock,
want our? Do we want our?
All's new. Y'all are going to have a pickle ball with the pastors event next Sunday. Give me some goals that are specific, measurable.
So we could have some folks from our church, and we could say, we want you to engage in at least 5 conversations over the course of 2 hours. Okay. And then we want to make sure that we have a contact card of some sort for those people, right? So that's specific, it's measurable, it's actionable. And then we want you in the next 2 weeks to follow up with the 5 people whom you had conversations with.
Fair enough.
There
I'm
you go.
okay with that. Good job,
Okay.
Kyle. Now, little Miss Sue comes to you and says, Kyle, it's time for us to do our quilting with the quilters extravaganza. When can we get this on the calendar? What are some things maybe you should filter through to decide whether or not that needs to be priority number one for you guys for a ministry event?
Yeah. Number one, does this help us reach our community?
Okay.
If we're gonna do an event, does this help us do that? Is there a target audience for this thing?
People.
Secondly, is this something that either the church at large or the community at large can participate in? Okay, so like a fall festival, right? I mean, the church at large, community at large, everybody can come. Is this something that's going to target a yeah? Who's the target audience for this? Why? What is the follow up from this thing? Yeah, and in this, Kate Downing specifically mentions a good question: are we doing this simply because it's always been done?
Yes.
Now, let me give a caveat here, Pastor. If you are in your first 2 years,
Cancel it. Tell them no.
you may need to let some of these things go. Okay, like you may need to let them have their thing, and you may need to talk about it from however you promote events. You may need to do this, but over time, there are very few things that I would advocate you outright killing. Okay, like very few. There are some that you can let die over the course of 2, maybe 3 years.
Okay.
And I would say oftentimes that's better. Like, and you could say, you know what, we're going to put this in the bulletin. That's not really something we're going to announce from the stage because that's a very segmented thing. But you're welcome to, let people know about it. You're welcome to recruit. You're welcome to do your thing. And in fact, Pastor, you might even need to show up to that thing.
So let me interject here to say,
Okay.
yours truly has broken like every rule that he sets for himself in like the first year. So number one is like no change. Like I'm a guy like stick with stuff, just roll with it, start tweaking things along the way. And 6 months in, we decided, you know what, we're going to merge our Spanish and our English services together into one. Now, it's been great, and there were reasons for it, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's so far we're 1 weekend, but it's gone really well. Great feedback, all of that kind of stuff. Now, I will say, germane to this conversation.
That's kind of like Matt. After the first game, a guy goes, "Man, he's batting 1,000 because he's 1 for 1. He pinch hit. He's 1 for 1. He's batting 1,000 on the season."
But I'm riding high right now.
Okay.
But I will say, within months, like we're talking like the first 2 months, like the immediate thing staring at me was Easter Fest and a chili cook-off.
Ooh.
Now, one of the reasons this kind of came to mind is one you mentioned about should we kill it? Is it the time to do it? That kind of deal.
Do you have the leadership capital to kill it? That's another
some
question.
of the all of that. So this was one of those where my out in thinking through some of these filters that were we going to do these things because we always did them? Yes, that was the only reason they were on our radar. Was a chili cook-off every year that we did for a student ministry fundraiser. The Easter Fest was obviously what it is. It's basically the Easter alternative to the Fall Fest, and that is probably the biggest outreach event that Plymouth Park would do, at least over the past few years, was Easter Fest and Fall Fest. Like maybe 1,000 would come to these. Big deal. I'm coming in like the first few weeks. This is what needs to happen, and it was one of those where in that one, like the Easter Fest, it was, hey, like we can't drop the ball on this. This has to be something that is wildly, hugely successful, and we don't have the time to pull that off. And so that was kind of the decision there. On the chili cook-off, it was one of those where like that meet the needs of the current church members, students, families, like we would do that chili cook-off every year. for our student ministry. And it was a fundraiser for it, all of that kind
Okay.
of stuff. And it was a similar situation where there was a lot of stuff happening at the same time. It was going to fall on like Super Bowl Sunday. It was going to be like after church.
Oh,
Super Bowl Sunday was the time that it was scheduled for, or something. If I recall, like this is now months later, and I survived not doing these things, but it didn't that time meet the need for our church members and students
yeah.
and family. It was just something we always did, but it didn't meet a need because for a couple of years now we haven't really had a student ministry, but we continue to have this event, and so we continue to have money go into the student ministry account. And so we had, I don't know, 30K in there. And at the
Wow.
time, an interim youth pastor that was doing a great job with, Sunday school, all that kind of stuff, but events weren't going to be a thing. And we were going to be able to fund the youth that we had for years, every camp, in every leadership retreat, and anything they could ever want to do for years, just with what the budget was providing in this
Yeah.
special fund that this thing was providing. And so, because of that particular place, that particular time, it was the right thing to do to cut it. So use wisdom, think through those
Yeah.
things. But think when you have those clear goals and guidelines and things like that, to think through what is the mission of this church. And it does not mean necessarily that you don't do that event, but it may mean that that event does not have to take a whole lot of your
Yeah.
gray hairs away. It could give you an out, obviously, if you needed to. Like this just isn't the time to really do that. But sometimes just doing events because they're just fun and you can enjoy being around Christians. That's not a bad
Yeah.
thing. That kind
Right.
of deal. So don't
Right.
don't be
Well,
too overzealous in
yeah.
ending stuff, but just use some wisdom and discernment when
And,
you're filtering some of those event plans.
and what you just said, doing events for your church family for the purpose of fellowship, community building is not a bad thing. And that goes to one of the questions that she asks: does this event meet our goals? So if you're trying to build some community, you may say yes. But I like this other one too, and this is really important too. Is this the right time in our yearly calendar for this event to happen? And for you, like doing a chili cook-off on Super Bowl Sunday was probably not the right time, right? And Pastor, listen, if somebody comes up to you at this point in the year, we're now into September. If somebody comes up to you and says, "Pastor, we need this thing to happen in either November or December," let me tell you, it's probably not the right time on your yearly calendar to make that event happen this year.
Yeah.
Okay, because there are on the calendar this year, there is less than a month between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Thanksgiving comes late, so there's less than 4 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'm willing to bet you don't want to cram anything else into those 2 months at this point.
Yeah.
So again, and at the same time, if you're going to do that, don't say, well, if you're going to act something, don't say, well, it worked for Matt Hensley, so it'll work for me.
Yeah. Good luck.
don't
like
don't
your
do it.
mileage
Don't
may very well vary.
Yeah.
I'm just so incredibly, winsome, and anybody will like what I have to say. I'm sure. No,
Yeah.
not at all. But healthy practice number 2 is recruiting to your weaknesses.
Yep.
Now, this is where my current context is going to be different from where I was in Mayhill Baptist, where the recruiting was all going to be volunteers and so forth. And so, to a degree, you can't always be as selective when it comes to volunteers because you may not even have all of the volunteers that you need in the first place to fill all of the roles that you have. In the case of us now at Plymouth Park, we have staff and we had an opening and stuff like that we were able to pursue. And so my question was not to find another Matt Hensley. That's the last thing that Plymouth Park or this world needs. But what we needed to find were what were some of our weaknesses, what were some of the things that maybe our team was lacking to be a little more complete. And in our case, that was bringing on a worship guy, because we had one that it was very difficult for him to be off, and needing somebody to kind of step into that role in a church that really highly values the music side of worship, to do that with excellence and stuff like that. And so we really sought a high caliber guy that could fill that role. Now, in your case, your mileage in maybe a smaller church or relying on volunteers and so forth, if you're the super creative guy and visionary guy, you need to maybe find some guys in your church that are a little more practical, a little more down to earth, that you trust, you love, that can tell you, hey, let's think through maybe the process for this? Do you have an engineer in your church? Do you have an accountant in your church? Like, some of those people are often wired a little bit differently. For us, you have two polar opposite people in terms of some strengths and weaknesses when it comes to Micah, our executive pastor, and me as senior pastor, where I think through kind of vision and goals and grace and faith and all of those. And Micah, no, that's his favorite word, is the spiritual gift of saying no. We don't have
Yep.
the money, or no, this isn't
Yep.
the right time, or whatever. Like, he thinks through things through a little more of a process and a little more analytical.
Yeah.
So think through that, Kyle, a little bit for us.
Yeah, this is where in Financial Peace University, Dave Ramsey talks about the free spirits and the nerds. Okay, so you need somebody.
Micah's a nerd.
So you need somebody on your team who is visionary, right? Who can just come up with outlandish big ideas. What if we did this thing, right? But you need the nerds who can come back and not just be like the penny pinchers. Well, how much is this going to cost? But can be the detail oriented folks. And so if you say, we want to do Easter in the park, and we want to have 2,000 people there next year. Awesome. Here are all the things that we got to get some city permits. We've got to get some chairs out there. Like, we got to make sure we have porta potties. Yeah, you can't just show up and say, hey, we're gonna have 2,000 people. It'll all be great. You need both sides of that, right? So if you are the free spirit, the big time thinker, you need some detail oriented folks on your team. And the vice versa is true also. If you are not that, you need some folks who can just walk into your office and be like, hey, I was, driving through the car wash and I had this idea I had to come tell you about right now, right? To balance yourself out so that you're not going too hard one way or the other.
Yeah. And a great example of that is actually this combination of our Spanish and English. Is in a staff meeting, several months ago, I said, hey, this is where I want us to go. Y'all tell me how to get there. This is what I think we need to do. What do we do? Here's what I think, but I need some of you guys to tell me how this works. Yep. Find other people that are doing it, whatever, bring it to me, and let's get a plan together. And then so we had some steps in place, because it's not just something you announce and it magically happens. Unless you're lucky. Like, I kind of, with Mayhill Baptist, I said, hey, we're going to have drive-in church during COVID. We're going to have drive-in church on Friday. And I had, 48 hours to figure it out. And that was one of those where I wish maybe instead of saying, hey, this Sunday we're going to do this, I got with my leaders and said, hey, we need a way to come up with meet. How can we possibly do that and work it out? But it worked out.
And COVID was unique. Like, most of the time, you're not having to make big decisions like that in a 48-hour time frame, right? So, in fact, don't. If you can help it at all, don't make those kind of decisions with that kind of turnaround.
Don't give your people whiplash. Like,
yes, absolutely not.
Healthy practice number 3 is multiplying yourself. And she talks about, where, multiplying yourself and others looks like bringing them along as you counsel, you make visits, where you write your messages. It means you have to learn how to delegate some responsibilities, all of that. And a great kind of model of this is my childhood mentor, the associate pastor at First Baptist in Grand Prairie, that we've talked about on the show before, where when I was 7 and I got saved, I started going with him weekly, if not several times a week, to make hospital visits and go to the nursing home and take the Lord's Supper to the shut-ins and all of that kind of stuff. I was with him all the time, learning how to minister to people. And we did that for almost a decade together. Wow. And when I was about 14, 15, 16, and sensing that call to ministry and opportunities to begin to serve, I wasn't trying to, as a student pastor, figure out how do I do a youth ministry. And I knew how to teach, I knew how to do games, I knew all of those kinds of things. But also that pastoral care came a little more naturally to me, because that's what I thought ministry was. Yep. And so a lot of your folks, and maybe even some of your volunteers or whatever, they think everything around you involves what you do in that pulpit. And so having some people to come along with you and make some of those visits and things like that as you go gives them a chance, one, to see behind the curtain, see that you're a normal person, number one, but two, as your church hopefully grows, And you cannot make each and every visit that needs to be made, and you're going to have people falling through the crack. You can be like, "Hey, Kyle, can you help me out here? We have somebody that's going to have knee surgery this week, and I'm out of town. Whatever, can you do it?" And they're not looking like a calf at a new gate, trying to figure out what to do,
Yeah.
what to say, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Kyle, anything on
This,
multiplying yourself?
no matter how good a leader you are, you cannot be in two places at one time, and inevitably that's going to come up. And so if you multiply yourself through other leaders, that will give you the opportunity to increase the impact of your ministry and your pastoral care. Man, raise folks up and then unleash them to do ministry.
This is probably, all of these things are, none of them are like unbiblical or whatever, but this is the most biblical one because it is what we are called to do. We are equipping the saints for the work of ministry. We are, to a degree, working ourselves out of jobs. And when you are that solo pastor, in particular in a smaller church, you are doing all the jobs. You might be doing the social media. You might be the one locking up and closing up and all of those kinds of things. You might be the one doing all of the visits. You might be doing all of the, don't be the guy that's also doing all of the accounting. Don't do that, pastor. Don't ever do that. But whatever it is, you need to start delegating, equipping people to fill in those roles because that's what you're called to do. And then finally, communicate well. We've talked about this recently, actually, and so we will put this in the show note as well to talk about whether it is your announcements in the pulpit or your emails or constant contact or Facebook, whatever. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And until you are tired of communicating it, communicate it a little bit more. And so it's one of those things that you really need to practice your communication, because sometimes we're just flying by the seat of our pants and we know that Sunday's coming. We know that we've got the sermon to do. We know that this event is coming, and maybe we could forget to faithfully communicate. And then there are those people that can rightly say, "Nobody told me this." Like, don't let that happen. So talk about communication real quick.
Yeah. I mean, whatever your channels are, right? Put stuff in there, make it available, multiple formats, and communicate it over and over again, because by the time you're sick of it, your folks are just starting to hear it for the first time. And here are some things to think through. Okay. Thanksgiving is on Thursday, December 28th. Christmas is on Wednesday.
You want to try that again?
Thanksgiving is on Thursday. Oh, did I say December? November 28th. Christmas is on Wednesday, December 25th. As I said, there is less than 4 weeks in there. If you are planning on making changes to your schedule, begin to think through now how you're going to communicate that. Stuff that's coming up, and there's going to be a lot. I mean, like I said, you're talking just under 4 weeks there. That's a lot of stuff. There's going to be a lot of stuff that happens. Think through now how you're going to communicate it, and what formats, whom you're going to communicate it to, right? That and because believe me, it's going to sneak up on you before you realize it. It's going to be here quickly.
As we wrap up, one of the 4 unhealthy practices is the final one, and I really think that kind of ties some of these 4 things together, and that is owning the ministry as an unhealthy thing. You need to own your mistakes. You need to own who you are. We've talked about be yourself in the pulpit. Don't try and be Billy Graham. Don't try to be Kyle Bierman. Definitely don't try to be Matt Hensley. Be yourself, all of that. But do not own the ministry. You're not called to own your people. You're not called to own your church. You are entrusted by God to be a steward of God's people and his ministry. You are ultimately, first and foremost, a servant. And so owning it and being kind of that dictator over that and the Lord over all of these things, you make a terrible savior. And so remember, you don't own it, but we need to really let go of the reins as much as we can.
There's one head of the church, and it ain't you. And so keep that in mind when you go about this. When you start giving ministry away to people, it is all to bring glory to God and to impact the people for the sake of the kingdom.
Well, Kyle, I love you, and I do hope that your Rangers make a 18-7 run or a 20 and
get back to 500 at least
4 run or whatever it is. But whether that happens, that remains to be seen. Hopefully, they put some of these practices in place, and maybe it will happen. But until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as a gospel we declare. Take care.
What's wrong with you people?